Set in modern times of an alternate world, Bright has somehow managed to blend together a buddy cop film and an urban fantasy, something of which on paper should not work very well. But with talented actors Will Smith and Joel Edgerton as the leading stars of Bright, perhaps what's said on paper doesn't really matter. I'm Melvin, and this is Unexplained Possibilities review of Bright. Bright is an interesting film as it is very original and yet you will have a familiar type of feeling with it. What I mean by this is if you've ever watched Alien Nation, Lethal Weapon, Training Day, and Street Kings, then Bright will give you that feeling of familiarity. The latter two, directed by David Ayer, who, surprise surprise, directs Bright. The influence of Training Day especially comes through in one particular scene in which Will Smith's character, Daryl Ward, has a Denzel-esque heart-to-heart with Joel Edgerton's character, Nick Jacoby. Because Bright is familiar, it doesn't mean it's bad. However, there will be times where you say, I could have sworn I saw this somewhere else. Bright is also a mature film, which I didn't know coming in. I thought it would be something along the lines of a PG-13 film. That's not the case. It's 100% for a mature audience. So please be aware of this if you're planning on watching the movie with kids. The look of the film is really good. They captured the real world and the segregation between classes. The look, the feel, and even the small annoyances they've gotten down perfectly. Unlike many films you see today, the CGI in Bright is not overdone, and that was a very refreshing thing for me to see. I should note that I personally dislike a lot of CGI in movies, so be aware that that might be my personal bias coming through. The practical effects and especially the makeup in Bright was also very well done. The world of Bright has lots of potential to be something huge. The fact that it's set in modern times, but an urban fantasy, helps it stand out tremendously from the overly done and soon to be played out superhero films. In Bright, there are 9 races. Humans, orcs, and elves are the primary ones shown off in the film, but we see glimpses of others, such as centaurs, dragons, and even lizard people. Even though the movie is 2 hours long, it doesn't do it any justice for us to learn about the world that Bright is set in. In fact, backstory exposition is almost non-existent in Bright, and you know what? I really like that. It makes the world feel like it's a mystery there, and it makes me want to know more about it and connect the dots. More films need to do that. Cut down on the backstory and jump into the present conflict. While a sequel for Bright has already been confirmed, it would do well for the creators to look into creating an expanded universe and perhaps even a TV series. Bright has the potential of growing into a major franchise, and it would be nothing else like it out there. The acting in Bright is pretty good, and you can tell that Will Smith and Joel Edgerton took their roles very seriously. The supporting actors is a bit of a different story. While no one is absolutely horrible, there are some over-the-top and overacting moments. Ike Barinholtz, who plays a very antagonistic Officer Pollard, comes to mind. Why the director didn't pull him aside and get him to bring it down some is beyond me. Perhaps Ike had a flashback to his Mad TV days where he was supposed to act over the top and come off like a joke. If that's the case, then he certainly succeeded here. Kenneth Choi and Bobby Nadiri aren't too great either with their portrayal as internal affairs. But that's a small nitpick as they are only in the film for one scene. I also want to add that Joel Edgerton played the mess out of Jacoby. He was so believable, and his performance of a somewhat dim-witted but honorable orc is darn good. If the film wasn't what it was, he would probably be nominated for an Oscar as his performance is just that good. The main characters themselves are extremely likable, but fit into most of the buddy cop cliche. Ward being close to retirement, having money issues, not trusting his partner, and being an honest cop surrounded by cops, not including Jacoby, who are corrupt. On the other hand, Jacoby is naive, wide-eyed, hopeful, by the book, and being shown the ropes by the more sensible and surly veteran on the force, Ward. The funny thing is that the cliches work for Jacoby. This might be a minor spoiler, but seeing as how Jacoby is the first orc to ever become a cop, it's okay for him to display those cliches. If he didn't, something would be very wrong. And going by what you see in the film, it would appear that the majority of policing is done by humans. So Jacoby being a fish out of water and trying to do things by the book makes sense. You get the feeling that if he messes up, he doesn't just mess up for himself, but for all orcs, as there is a very well established grudge against them already. Now, let's move into the story aspects of Bright. Like I said in the beginning, Bright is a buddy cop movie, and it follows these two cops, Ward and Jacoby, as a simple day on the beat goes from annoying to downright terrible. Ward and Jacoby find themselves in the middle of a deadly cat and mouse game over an item known as a magic wand. The magic wand is said to be able to grant anyone's wish through the use of magic, but there's a couple of catches. The first catch is that magic has been prohibited on a global scale since 1852. Also, not everyone can pick up a magic wand and use it. This is the second catch. Only certain people are able to use the wands, and they're known as Brights. Ward and Jacoby come across such a person, and they aim to protect her and ultimately find out who is pursuing her and why. This leads them to finding out about a type of a secret society who uses magic and have their own sinister purpose for doing so. Upon finding this out, Ward and Jacoby seek the help of the feds, who deal with issues regarding magic. However, on their journey to make it to the feds, the cops cross paths with two gangs who want the wands for their own nefarious needs. So, Ward and Jacoby's night becomes a lot longer. I feel I must say that the story and adventure was a lot of fun, and it will keep your interest. Ultimately, while the story isn't particularly deep, it sets up the world and lets us see what life is like for these people living in it. Yes, there are some predictable moments, the biggest one being the ending, but you still want more. The story also has an interesting dynamic and subplot on its take of racism. In this case, the orcs being on the receiving end of said racism, which part of this revolves around Jacoby trying to be accepted as a police officer despite him being an orc. In fact, him being an orc causes unneeded problems for Ward both mentally and physically. Now, Bright isn't for everyone, but the same can be said for all movies. If you're not into the fantasy type stories and you think they're too slow or all the same, then you should watch this film. It's not your ordinary fantasy, and it doesn't follow the tropes that are well established for the fantasy genre. The buddy cop aspect of the film isn't bad or overdone either. You can see the relationship between Ward and Jacoby grow over the course of the film, but the antagonizing, mostly coming from Ward, is ever present throughout. Think of the relationship between Jack Cates and Reggie Hammond from 48 Hours. Tolerable, but not quite friends. I went in not expecting much, but came out pleasantly surprised. While I can't say I'm blown away, I can see the potential of Bright, and I hope they grow this into a franchise. I recommend Bright for anyone who wants a different take on the buddy cop film and fantasy film. Those who aren't already into those genres will find something to like about Bright, and you will enjoy the stellar performances of Will Smith and Joel Edgerton. Thank you all for checking out our review of Bright, and let us know what you think in the comment section down below on Facebook or even Twitter. Those links can be found in the description. Once again, I'm Melvin, and thank you for checking out Unexplained Possibilities review of Bright.